The musket ball grazed Caspian Blackthorn's shoulder just as he dove behind the oak tree, blood streaming down his arm as he pressed his back against the rough bark. 3 days of running through the Tennessee wilderness had brought him to this hiding. Like a wounded animal while bounty hunters closed in from all sides. "I know you're out there, Blackthorn," shouted Vernon Creed, the lead hunter whose voice carried the cruel satisfaction of a man who enjoyed his work. $30,000 says you're worth more dead than alive. Caspian gritted his teeth against the pain. The accusations were lies. He'd never murdered Colonel Ashford's son in that duel, despite what the official report claimed. The boy had been shot in the back while Caspian's pistol remained unfired. But Ashford's money had bought silence from every witness except the ones who'd conveniently disappeared. Through the trees, he could see the shimmer of water, a creek that might offer escape if he could reach it without being spotted. His vision blurred as blood loss took its toll, but desperation drove him forward, stumbling through the underbrush toward what he prayed was salvation. The creek was deeper than expected, and as he slipped beneath the surface, the cool water felt like heaven against his fevered skin. He needed to wash the blood away to tend his wound before infection set in. But first, he had to be sure the hunters had lost his trail. Cautiously, he surfaced in a sheltered bend where overhanging willows created a natural curtain. The water was crystal clear here, fed by mountain springs, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to relax slightly. Stripping off his torn shirt, he began to wash the blood from his shoulder, wincing as the cold water hit the raw wound. That's when he heard the sharp intake of breath from the bank. Caspian spun around, water cascading from his naked torso as he searched for the source of the sound. There, partially hidden behind a massive oak, stood a woman in a white dress, but not just any woman. Even through his pain-clouded vision, he could see she was breathtaking. Evangeline Ashworth had come to the creek seeking solitude, as she did every day since her husband's death 6 months ago. The townspeople called her the White Widow because she'd never stopped wearing mourning clothes, and because her ethereal beauty seemed almost ghostly in her grief. But what she saw emerging from the water like some pagan river god made her forget her propriety entirely. The man was magnificent, tall, and powerfully built, with dark hair plastered to his head and water streaming over muscles that spoke of hard living and harder fighting. But it was his eyes that captured her, storm gray and fierce, even as blood seeped from the wound on his shoulder. "Don't move," she whispered, though whether she was talking to him or herself, she couldn't say. Caspian froze, acutely aware of his nakedness and vulnerability. Any moment, this woman could scream and bring the bounty hunters running. But instead of fleeing or calling for help, she stepped closer, her violet eyes unusual and striking, taking in every detail of his injured form. "You're hurt," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Badly." "Stay back," he warned, though his voice lacked conviction. Something about her pulled at him, the way she looked at him, not with fear or disgust, but with genuine concern for a stranger's pain. Evangeline ignored his warning, moving to the water's edge with the determined grace of a woman accustomed to having her way. "I'm a widow, sir, not a sheltered maiden. I've tended wounds before." Her eyes swept over his body again, lingering on the angry red gash. "That needs immediate attention, or you'll bleed to death. The hunters are searching the wrong side of the creek," she finished calmly. "I saw them ride past an hour ago. Heading north. You have time, but not much." Caspian studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. What he found instead was intelligence, compassion, and something else, a flicker of heat that had nothing to do with medical concern. This proper widow was affected by the sight of his naked body, and the knowledge sent an unexpected thrill through him despite his precarious situation. "Why would you help me?" he asked. "You don't even know who I am." Evangeline's lips curved. in the first genuine smile she'd felt in months. "I know you're a man in trouble, and that's enough." She paused, then added with surprising boldness, "Besides, I've noticed much more than just your injury, and I'd rather not see such perfection go to waste." The frankness of her words sent heat pooling in his groin, and Caspian was suddenly very aware of how the cool water was affecting certain parts of his anatomy. This mysterious widow was far more dangerous than any bounty hunter. She threatened not just his freedom, but his very sanity. "Come out of the water," she commanded softly. "Let me help you before those hunters double back." As he moved toward shore, completely exposed and utterly at her mercy, Caspian realized his life had just taken a turn that would change everything. The White Widow had found him bathing, and what she'd noticed was about to bind them together in ways neither could have imagined. Evangeline's breath caught in her throat as Caspian emerged from the water, rivulets streaming down his powerful frame like liquid silver in the dappled sunlight. She'd been married for 3 years before her husband's death, but Edmund had been a gentle, scholarly man. Nothing had prepared her for the raw masculinity of this wounded stranger. "Here," she said, pulling a cloth from her basket with hands that trembled only slightly. "Let me see that wound properly." Caspian hesitated at the water's edge, acutely aware of his nudity and the effect it was having on both of them. "Ma'am, this isn't proper." "Propriety be damned," Evangeline said with surprising vehemence. "I'm a widow, not a virgin, and you're injured. Now stop being foolish and let me help you before you collapse." Her authoritative tone brooked no argument, and Caspian found himself moving toward her despite every instinct screaming that this was dangerous, not because she might betray him, but because of the way her violet eyes were devouring every inch of his body with undisguised appreciation. She guided him to sit on a fallen log, then knelt beside him to examine the wound. Her fingers were gentle but sure as they probed the torn flesh, and Caspian had to bite back a groan not from pain, but from the exquisite torture of her touch on his bare skin. "The bullet passed through cleanly," she observed, her voice professionally detached despite the flush creeping up her neck. "You're fortunate. A few inches lower and it would have shattered bone." "Fortunate seems relative at the moment," he said dryly, trying to ignore the way her breath felt against his shoulder as she worked. Evangeline smiled at his wry tone, finding his humor in the face of danger unexpectedly appealing. "What's your name?" she asked as she cleaned the wound with practiced efficiency. "Caspian," he said after a moment's hesitation. "Caspian Blackthorn," her hand stilled on his shoulder. "The man they say killed Marcus Ashford in that duel." Caspian tensed, waiting for her to recoil, to call for the hunters, to reveal herself as another of his enemies. Instead, her touch gentled, becoming almost caressing. "But you didn't, did you?" she said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes. You're not a cold-blooded killer. How can you be so certain?" Evangeline's hands moved to cup his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Because a man who kills for sport doesn't look at a woman the way you're looking at me right now. There's honor in you, Caspian Blackthorn, along with desire so intense it takes my breath away." The admission hung between them like a spark waiting to ignite tinder. Caspian's hands came up to cover hers, marveling at the softness of her skin, the delicate bones beneath. "You don't know what you're saying," he said roughly. "I'm a wanted man with nothing to offer but danger and a life on the run. And I'm a woman who's been dead inside for 6 months, until I saw you rising from that water like something out of my most forbidden dreams." Her thumb traced his cheekbone with deliberate tenderness. "Tell me you don't feel this connection between us. Tell me your blood isn't singing the same song as mine." Instead of answering with words, Caspian pulled her closer, his mouth covering hers in a kiss that was desperate, hungry, and completely inappropriate given their circumstances. But Evangeline melted against him, her arms winding around his neck as she returned the kiss with an ardor that set his very soul on fire. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and the air between them crackled with sexual tension, so thick it was almost visible. "This is madness," Caspian whispered against her lips. "Yes," she agreed, then kissed him again. "But it's the most alive I've felt since Edmund died. Don't you dare ask me to give up this feeling now that I've found it." The sound of distant voices made them both freeze. The bounty hunters were returning, their shouts growing closer by the minute. "My cottage is half a mile upstream," Evangeline said urgently, pulling back to look into his eyes. "Hidden in a grove of white pines where no one ever goes. You can hide there while your wound heals. I can't drag you into this. You're not dragging me anywhere," she said firmly. "I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you, even if I don't fully understand why." Her eyes blazed with determination and something deeper. "Unless you're planning to break my heart by disappearing before I can discover what this feeling between us really means." Caspian stared at her, this incredible woman who'd appeared in his darkest hour like an angel of salvation. She was offering him sanctuary, hope, and something he'd never dared dream of, the possibility of love. "Get dressed quickly," she said, helping him to his feet. "I'll gather your clothes. We need to move before they search this area again." As he struggled into his torn shirt, wincing as the fabric pulled against his bandaged wound, Caspian couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. The White Widow had found him bathing, had seen him at his most vulnerable, and instead of turning away, she'd offered him everything. Now he just had to figure out if he was brave enough to accept it. Evangeline's cottage was like something from a fairy tale, small and perfectly formed, with whitewashed walls and windows framed by climbing roses that had somehow survived the early frost. Tucked deep in a grove of towering pines, it was invisible from any main path, a secret sanctuary that felt removed from the harsh realities of the outside world. "I built this place after Edmund died," she explained softly as she helped Caspian. Inside, her arm around his waist to steady him. "I needed somewhere to escape the pitying looks and endless condolences. Somewhere I could grieve in private." Caspian looked around the single room with its stone fireplace, simple furnishings, and shelves lined with books. Everything was clean and feminine without being frilly, a reflection of its owner's quiet strength. "It's perfect," he said, meaning it. "But won't people notice you're missing from town? I told everyone I was visiting my sister in Nashville for a month." Evangeline guided him to the bed, a narrow but comfortable-looking affair covered in white linens. "No one will come looking for me here." The implications of being completely alone with her for weeks hit Caspian like a physical blow. The cottage was intimate, cozy, designed for one person. There was no separate room, no propriety-saving distance, just this beautiful, lonely widow and the man she'd saved from certain death. "I should sleep on the floor," he said, even as his body betrayed him by swaying with exhaustion and blood loss. "Don't be ridiculous." Evangeline pushed him gently onto the bed, her hands firm but tender. "You're injured and weak. Besides," she added with a smile that was both innocent and knowing, "I'm a grown woman, not some sheltered maiden. I think I can manage to share a bed with a man without losing my virtue." "That's not what I'm worried about," Caspian muttered, watching as she moved around the small space with unconscious grace, lighting a fire, preparing tea, making the place feel like a home instead of a hiding place. "Then what are you worried about?" He caught her hand as she passed, pulling her down to sit beside him on the edge of the bed. "I'm worried that spending weeks alone with you will drive me mad with wanting what I can't have. I'm worried that I'll do something to hurt you or compromise you beyond repair. And I'm worried that when this is over and I have to leave, It will destroy us both. Evangeline's free hand came up to trace the strong line of his jaw, her touch feather-light but devastating in its tenderness. "What makes you think you can't have me?" she asked quietly. "What makes you assume I don't want to be compromised, thoroughly and completely, by the most magnificent man I've ever seen?" Caspian's breath caught at her boldness. "Evangeline, I know what I'm saying," she interrupted, her violet eyes burning with intensity. "I know exactly what I'm offering. I was married for 3 years to a good man, but Edmund was gentle, careful, almost reverential in his attentions. He treated me like spun glass, afraid I might break if he showed too much passion." Her hand slid down to rest over his heart, feeling the rapid thud beneath her palm. "But you look at me like you want to devour me whole. Like I'm strong enough to match your fire instead of being consumed by it. Do you have any idea how intoxicating that is for a woman who spent her entire life being handled with kid gloves?" "You don't understand," Caspian said desperately, even as his body responded to her proximity with embarrassing obviousness. "I'm not a gentleman, Evangeline. I'm a gambler, a fighter, a man with blood on his hands and enemies who'll never stop hunting me. You deserve better than—" She silenced him with a kiss that was soft but unmistakably possessive, her lips moving against his with growing confidence as she felt his response. When she pulled back, her eyes were dark with desire and determination. "I deserve to feel alive again," she said firmly. "I deserve to experience passion, real, consuming, dangerous passion, before I'm too old to appreciate it. And you, Caspian Blackthorn, make me feel things I didn't even know were possible." To prove her point, she took his hand and placed it over her heart, letting him feel how wildly it was racing. Through the thin fabric of her dress, he could feel the heat of her skin, the soft swell of her breast beneath his palm. "Feel what you do to me," she whispered. "Tell me that's not worth risking everything for." Caspian groaned, his control fracturing as desire overwhelmed logic. "This will change everything between us." "Good," she said with a smile that was pure feminine triumph. "I want everything to change. I want you to change me, corrupt me, teach me what it means to be truly desired by a man who isn't afraid of his own passion." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the small room as tension stretched between them like a bowstring ready to snap. Outside, wind whispered through the pines, but inside the cottage, the only sounds were their increasingly ragged breathing and the wild beating of two hearts discovering something neither had expected to find. "Evangeline," Caspian said one last time, his voice rough with need and warning, "if we do this, there's no going back. You'll be mine, completely and irrevocably, and I don't share what belongs to me." Instead of being intimidated by his possessive declaration, she leaned closer, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered, "Promise?" The single word shattered the last of Caspian's restraint. With a growl that was part desperation and part triumph, he pulled Evangeline against him, claiming her mouth in a kiss that held nothing back. She melted into him with a soft moan of surrender, her hands fisting in his hair as she matched his passion with her own. "Are you certain?" he asked one final time, pulling back to search her face for any trace of doubt or fear. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," she breathed, her fingers already working at the buttons of his shirt. "Make me yours, Caspian, completely." What followed was a slow, exquisite exploration of desire long denied. Caspian worshipped every inch of her pale skin as he undressed her, his lips and hands mapping territories that had never known such focused attention. Evangeline had thought herself experienced, but Edmund's gentle ministrations paled in comparison to the fierce tenderness with which Caspian claimed her body, when he finally made her his completely, moving deep within her with careful control. Despite his obvious need, she understood why the poets wrote of love as both heaven and hell. The pleasure was so intense it bordered on pain, The connection so profound it rewrote the very foundations of who she thought herself to be. Mine. He whispered against her throat as she trembled beneath him, his voice rough with possession and wonder. "Tell me you're mine, Evangeline." "Yours," she gasped, her nails digging into his shoulders as another wave of sensation crashed over her. "Only yours, now and forever." They made love with the desperate intensity of two people who'd found something precious and rare, something worth fighting the world to keep. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they lay entwined in the narrow bed, hearts still racing, skin still humming with the aftershocks of passion. "No regrets?" Caspian asked softly, his fingers trailing through her dark hair as she rested her head on his chest. "None," Evangeline said firmly, "though I suspect we've just complicated things considerably." His low chuckle vibrated through his chest. "Understatement of the year, darling." Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural despite its temporary nature. Evangeline tended his wound with gentle efficiency, watching with satisfaction as it began to heal cleanly. Caspian helped with daily tasks despite her protests about his injury, chopping wood, maintaining the fire, and generally making himself useful in ways that touched her heart. But it was the nights that truly bound them together. In the darkness of the small cottage, with only firelight to illuminate their passion, they explored every facet of desire with an intensity that left them both shaken. Caspian was a generous and inventive lover, teaching Evangeline pleasures she'd never dreamed possible, while she responded with an enthusiasm that drove him to the very edge of madness. "I love watching you come undone in my arms," he murmured, one night as she lay boneless and sated against his chest. "The way you surrender completely, holding nothing back, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "Edmund always made me feel like I should be ashamed of wanting too much," she admitted quietly. "But with you, I feel like I could never want enough." "Never be ashamed of your desires with me," Caspian said fiercely. "I want all of you, every moan, every gasp, every wild moment when you forget to be the proper widow everyone expects you to be." Their idyllic interlude couldn't last forever, though neither wanted to acknowledge that fact. On the 10th day, while Caspian was splitting wood behind the cottage, Evangeline spotted riders in the distance, too far away to be an immediate threat, but close enough to remind them both that the outside world hadn't forgotten about the wanted man hiding in her bed. "They're getting closer," she said when he came inside, noting how his face had grown hard and watchful again. "I know." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "I should go tonight, before they expand their search to this area." "No." The word was torn from her throat with violent emotion. "I won't let you go back to running and hiding, sleeping in ditches and dodging bullets. There has to be another way. Evangeline, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable." She pulled back to glare at him with fierce determination. "You said you didn't kill Marcus Ashford. That means someone else did, and they're letting you take the blame. We need to find out who really pulled that trigger." Caspian stared at her, hope warring with resignation in his storm-gray eyes. "Even if we could prove my innocence, Colonel Ashford has too much power, too much influence. He wants someone to pay for his son's death, and I'm a convenient scapegoat. Then we'll have to make sure the evidence is so overwhelming that even he can't ignore it." Evangeline's jaw set with stubborn resolve. "I have connections in Nashville society, people who trust me. And I have something else a reason to fight for. Our future together." She took his hands in hers, her violet eyes blazing with love and determination. "I'm not letting them steal you away from me, Caspian Blackthorn. Not when I've just found the other half of my soul." The revelation came from the most unexpected source, a scared tavern girl named Mercy who'd been serving drinks the night of the fatal duel. Evangeline had spent 3 days in Nashville, using her late husband's connections to quietly investigate the circumstances surrounding Marcus Ashford's death, while Caspian remained hidden at the cottage, going slowly mad, with worry for her safety. "Please, ma'am," Mercy whispered, glancing nervously around the empty taproom where they'd arranged to meet. "If anyone finds out I talked to you... No one will know," Evangeline assured her gently, pressing a small bag of coins into the girl's trembling hands. "Just tell me what you saw that night." "Mr. Ashford, the young one, he was drunk. Mean drunk, the kind where he got nasty with anyone who looked at him wrong." Mercy's voice shook as she remembered. "He kept picking fights, calling out gentlemen for imagined slights." "What about Mr. Blackthorne?" "That's just it, Mr. Blackthorne wasn't even supposed to be there that night. He came looking for his friend, Mr. Garrett, who owed money to some dangerous men. Young Ashford saw him and started making accusations, calling him a cheat and a coward." Evangeline leaned forward intently. "Then what happened?" "They went outside to settle it proper-like, with seconds and everything. But while they were standing, back to back, counting off paces," Mercy's voice dropped to a terrified whisper, "I saw someone in the shadows by the stable, someone with a rifle." "Who?" "I couldn't see clear, but I heard him talking to someone after. A voice I recognized, Luther Grimm, the colonel's foreman. He was saying how the colonel would be pleased, how this would solve all their problems." Evangeline's blood ran cold. "You're saying Colonel Ashford had his own son killed?" "Not the colonel himself, but ... Mercy wrung her hands nervously. "There were rumors, ma'am, about young Marcus and what he discovered in his father's business dealings. Some said he was going to the territorial authorities with evidence of illegal land acquisitions, forced sales to desperate farmers." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Colonel Ashford had built his empire through intimidation and fraud, but his own son's conscience had threatened to destroy everything. Rather than face exposure, he'd arranged Marcus's death and pinned it on a convenient scapegoat, a known gambler with a reputation for violence. "Would you be willing to testify to what you saw?" Evangeline asked. Mercy shook her head frantically. "I can't. They'd kill me for sure. But there might be another way... She hesitated, then continued reluctantly. "Luther Grimm keeps a journal. Records all his jobs for the colonel, dates and details. If you could get hold of it... 2 hours. Later, Evangeline was racing back toward the cottage, her mind spinning with plans and possibilities. She found Caspian pacing like a caged wolf, his relief at seeing her safe quickly turning to sharp attention as she explained what she'd learned. "It's brilliant in its simplicity," he said grimly. "Ashford eliminates a threat to his criminal empire and gets revenge on the man who exposed his son's cowardice in that card game last spring. 2 birds with 1 stone." "But we can prove it now," Evangeline said eagerly, "if we can get Luther Grimm's journal." "We?" Caspian's expression hardened. "You're not getting any more involved in this than you already are. Ashford is a dangerous man, and if he suspects you're working against him, he'll what? Kill another innocent person?" Evangeline's eyes flashed with righteous anger. "I'm already involved, Caspian. The moment I chose to save you instead of turning you in, I became part of this. And I'll be damned if I'm going to sit quietly while the man I love is hunted for a crime he didn't commit." The casual declaration of love hit him like a physical blow. They'd been dancing around the word for days, both feeling it but neither daring to voice it aloud. Now it hung between them, precious and terrifying in its implications. "Evangeline, don't you dare say it's too soon or too dangerous to love you," she said fiercely. "I know what I feel. I know what we have together is worth fighting for. The question is whether you feel the same way." Instead of answering with words, Caspian pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a desperation that spoke of love too deep for language. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you too," he said roughly. "More than my own life, which is why I can't let you risk yourself. For me. And I can't let the man I love spend the rest of his life running from a crime he didn't commit." She cupped his face in her hands, her touch gentle but implacable. "We're in this together now, Caspian. Partners in every sense of the word." He stared into her determined violet eyes, seeing the strength and courage that had drawn him from the first moment he'd laid eyes on her. This wasn't the pampered widow he'd initially assumed her to be. This was a woman of steel wrapped in silk, someone worthy of being fought for and fought beside. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this my way. Carefully, intelligently, with backup plans for our backup plans." Evangeline's smile was radiant with triumph and love. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As they began planning their assault on Luther Grimm's carefully guarded secrets, neither noticed the figure watching from the tree line, a figure who'd finally tracked the elusive Caspian Blackthorn to his hiding place and was even now riding hard to collect the bounty on his head. The attack came at dawn, when the mist still clung to the pine trees and the world was painted in shades of silver and shadow. Caspian's warrior instincts woke him seconds before the cottage door exploded inward, giving him just enough time to roll from the bed and reach for his gun. "Well, well," drawled Vernon Creed, his rifle trained on the bed where Evangeline lay, frozen in terror. The famous Caspian Blackthorn, caught with his pants down and his guard down. How the mighty have fallen. 3 more bounty hunters crowded into the small space, their weapons creating a deadly crossfire that made resistance seem impossible. But Caspian's mind was already calculating angles, distances, possibilities, anything that might get Evangeline out of this alive. "Let the woman go," he said calmly, his hands raised but his body coiled for action. "She's innocent in all this." Creed's laughter was genuinely amused. "Innocent? Boy, she's been harboring a wanted fugitive for near 2 weeks. That makes her an accessory at minimum." His eyes swept over Evangeline's barely clothed form with obvious appreciation. "Though I have to admit, I can see why you'd risk everything for a taste of that." "Touch her and I'll kill you," Caspian said with deadly quiet conviction. "You're not in a position to be making threats," Creed replied. But something in Caspian's voice made him take a half step back despite himself. Even cornered and outnumbered, the man radiated lethal danger. That's when Evangeline made her move. With a speed that shocked everyone in the room, she rolled off the far side of the bed, grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, and brought it down on the nearest hunter's wrist with bone-crushing force. His scream and the clatter of his dropped weapon provided the distraction Caspian needed to launch himself across the room. What followed was brutal, efficient violence. Caspian had learned to fight in rough saloons and mining camps where hesitation meant death, and he brought all that hard-earned skill to bear now. Within seconds, 2 hunters were down and Creed found himself staring down the barrel of his own rifle, now in Caspian's capable hands. "The tables have turned," Caspian observed, with grim satisfaction. "Now we're going to have a little chat about who really killed Marcus Ashford." Creed's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." Evangeline had wrapped herself in a sheet and now stood beside Caspian, her violet eyes blazing with righteous fury. "I think Colonel Ashford told you exactly who to hunt and exactly what story to tell when you brought back the body. You're both loco if you think." His words cut off as Caspian pressed the rifle barrel against his throat. "I'm going to ask you once, and if I don't like your answer, I'm going to show you just how loco I can get. Did Colonel Ashford order his own son's death?" Something in Caspian's voice, a cold, implacable certainty, finally broke through Creed's. "Lester," The bounty hunter was a hard man who'd killed without remorse, but looking into those storm-gray eyes, he suddenly understood he was dealing with something far more dangerous than a simple fugitive. All right, he gasped as the rifle barrel pressed deeper. Yes, the colonel set it up. His boy was going to expose some land deal, cost the old man a fortune and probably a rope. So he arranged for Luther Grimm to take care of the problem during the duel and blame it on me. You had the perfect reputation for it, known gunfighter, gambler, man with a temper. Who would question that you'd killed in a duel gone wrong? Evangeline and Caspian exchanged glances. They had their confession, but from a man who just admitted to being part of a conspiracy. His word alone wouldn't be enough to clear Caspian's name. There's more, Creed continued desperately, seeing death in Caspian's eyes. Grimm kept records, everything he did for the colonel, all written down like a ledger. Insurance, he called it, in case Ashford ever tried to throw him to the wolves. Where? His cabin, about 10 miles north of here, hidden floorboard under his bed. Creed swallowed hard. But you'll never get to it alive. The colonel's got men watching every approach. Let us worry about that, Evangeline said firmly. She looked at Caspian with complete trust and determination. We have what we need now, confirmation and the location. We can end this. Caspian studied the 3 captive bounty hunters, his mind working through possibilities. There's going to be a reckoning, he said finally. But first, we're going to make sure we survive to see justice done. As he began tying up their prisoners, using their own ropes and expertise against them, Evangeline felt a fierce surge of pride in the man she'd chosen to love. He wasn't just a victim anymore, he was a force of nature, and together they were going to bring down the man who tried to destroy them both. The game was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, they were the ones holding all the cards. The showdown came not at Luther Grimm's cabin, but in the middle of Copper Creek's main street at high noon on a Sunday when the entire town was gathered for the weekly service. Evangeline had suggested the public venue. No one, not even Colonel Ashford, would dare attempt violence in front of so many witnesses. She stood on the church steps beside Reverend Morrison, the leather journal clutched in her white-gloved hands, like a weapon of divine justice. Every page documented years of intimidation, fraud, and murder, including the detailed account of Marcus Ashford's assassination and the subsequent framing of Caspian Blackthorne. The townspeople murmured in shock and disbelief as she read selected passages aloud, her clear voice carrying easily across the stunned crowd. Colonel Ashford sat rigid in his front pew, his face a mask of barely controlled rage as his carefully constructed empire crumbled around him. "These are lies," he finally roared, rising to his feet with aristocratic indignation. "The ravings of a delusional woman who's been corrupted by a known killer." "Then explain this," came a calm voice from the back of the church. Caspian Blackthorne walked down the center aisle like an avenging angel, his bearing proud and confident despite the gasps of recognition from the congregation. Behind him walked Vernon Creed and his surviving partner, both in shackles and accompanied by the newly arrived federal marshal Garrison, whose stern presence commanded immediate respect. "Colonel Ashford," Marshal Garrison announced in a voice that brooked no argument, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and the wrongful persecution of an innocent man. This is preposterous." Ashford sputtered, but his face had gone pale as he saw the damning evidence mounted against him. "I am a pillar of this community, a man of standing. You're a murderer who killed his own son to protect your criminal enterprises," Caspian said with deadly quiet intensity. He'd reached the front of the church now, standing beside Evangeline with the easy confidence of a man finally vindicated. "And you tried to destroy an innocent woman to cover your tracks." The colonel's composure finally cracked completely. With a roar of rage, he lunged for the derringer hidden in his coat, but Caspian was ready for him. The two men crashed together in a tangle of violence that had the congregation screaming and scrambling for cover, but the fight was brief and decisive. Years of clean living and honest work had kept Caspian in fighting trim, while Ashford's comfortable lifestyle had made him soft. Within moments, the colonel found himself flat on his back with Caspian's boot on his throat and his own weapon pointed at his head. "It's over," Caspian said simply. "Justice for your son, justice for all the families you destroyed, and justice for the woman you tried to use as a pawn in your sick game." As Marshal Garrison took Colonel Ashford into custody, reading the charges that would undoubtedly result in a hanging, the townspeople began to realize they were witnessing history. The corruption that had plagued their community for years was finally being exposed and punished. "Ladies and gentlemen," Evangeline called out, her voice ringing with triumph and joy, "I'd like you to meet my husband Caspian Blackthorne, an innocent man who's been vindicated by the truth." The wedding had been hastily arranged once Caspian's name was cleared, conducted by Reverend Morrison in the same church where justice had finally been served. Now, as they stood together accepting congratulations from their neighbors and friends, both felt the profound satisfaction of having fought for their love and won. "Any regrets?" Caspian asked softly as they made their way through the crowd, his arm possessively around Evangeline's waist. "Only one," she replied with the mischievous smile he'd come to adore. "I regret that it took so long for me to find the creek where destiny was waiting for me." Destiny? A magnificent man, bathing in crystal clear water, who turned out to be everything I never knew I needed. She rose on her toes to kiss him softly, not caring who was watching. "Though I have to say, you looked even better wet and naked than you do in your wedding suit." Caspian's laughter boomed across the churchyard, rich and genuine and full of the joy of a man who'd found his other half. "Well, Mrs. Blackthorne, I believe that can be arranged. We do have a creek on our property, after all." "Our property?" "I bought the land surrounding your cottage," he said with obvious pride. "Figured you might want to keep your sanctuary, but with a few additions. Like a proper house for when we have children, and maybe some cattle to make it a working ranch." Evangeline's eyes filled with tears of happiness. This man who'd started as a desperate fugitive had become her partner, her lover, her husband, and now the architect of their shared future. "Children?" she asked hopefully. "As many as you want," he promised, pulling her closer. "Sons with your violet eyes, daughters with my stubborn streak, and all of them raised knowing that true love is worth fighting for, no matter what obstacles stand in your way." As they climbed into their buggy to begin the ride home to their home, their life, their forever, the setting sun painted the Tennessee sky in shades of gold and rose. Behind them lay a past full of pain and persecution. Ahead lay endless possibilities for happiness, built on a foundation of passion, trust, and the kind of love that conquers all. "I love you, Caspian Blackthorne," Evangeline said as they drove through the gathering twilight, her head resting on his strong shoulder. "And I love you, my darling wife," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "My beautiful, brave, impossible white widow who saved my life in every way that matters." Years later, when their children asked how their parents met, they would hear the legendary tale of the White Widow, who found a wounded man bathing in her creek and noticed much more than water. It became a family story passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected encounters lead to the most extraordinary love stories, and in the cottage by the creek, now expanded into a sprawling ranch house filled with laughter and love, Caspian and Evangeline Blackthorne proved every day that some fairy tales do come true, especially for those brave enough to fight for their happy ending.